What's the good word, y'all? It's your boy DKB here. I wanted to dive into one of my final big winners from OTAs with some of the final thoughts and news coming out. Wide receiver Xavier Gipson going into his second year. Now, he was a real good, feel-good story last year. Undrafted free agent, found a way to work himself onto the roster, primarily as a special teams guy. Week 1 with Aaron Rodgers going down after 4 plays, winning it in overtime on a kick return, which is what we heard him get hyped up the most about during OTAs in his rookie year, and he seems to be capitalizing once again. Take a look at the depth chart ahead of him. Garrett Wilson, obviously we've heard about the star-studded connection between him and Aaron Rodgers. You have Mike Williams, who happens to still be rehabbing and is working his way back to get prepped for training camp, so he hasn't gotten any real field work. Malachi Corley, the recent third-round draft pick, he's had some shining moments, but he's also been nicked up a little bit and has had to step off the field. And then Alan Lazard, who, unfortunately, has not had a strong camp showing. He's had some decent plays here and there, but largely the hands seem to be buttery, and the chemistry that he's had between Aaron Rodgers and himself, while there's been flashes, it doesn't seem to be where it needs to be at. I specifically remember one of the call-outs being that Aaron Rodgers kicked or threw his helmet off and slammed it, something of that nature, after Alan Lazard either ran a wrong route or dropped the ball in coverage, and I believe it was versus Stickers on the day that he really stood out. But in terms of Xavier Gipson, a lot of the commentary has been that he's looked more comfortable going into year 2 as you'd expect. He's had big plays. His most recent practice wrapping up with a huge 59 or 60-yard touchdown bomb where he was able to glide past everybody else. Return-wise, outside of that big moment last year, he's had some problems, specifically with ball security, but it looks like he's done a better job being able to corral those balls in and still make some plays happen on special teams. You take a look at what I talked about in terms of the guys ahead of him, and he's been able to get a lot of starting level first string slot receiver reps, even ahead of Corley when he was healthy. So there are going to be some aspects of things like the slot receiver position, and as Salah mentioned, the return positions that he'll essentially be penciled in as the starter for, and we'll see if he can continue to lock that down, specifically as a receiver though, because there is a lot of work that needs to get done. I think a lot of times we get caught up in some of the huge moments and the emotions of seeing a guy succeed, whether he's an undrafted free agent guy, first round pick, free agent pickup, etc., and we forget about the big picture. And largely, he did have a ton of issues, specifically with the ball security, which is why I'm happy to hear that he's been able to keep things from hitting the ground. 3 fumbles as a returner last year. I believe it was 2 as a kick returner, 1 as a punt returner, and then outside of that one major OT return, he didn't do anything exceptional. So there was going to be a lot of second-year improvements needed, right? And we're not going to get that just by seeing and hearing OTAs. I really can't wait for training camp to kick off when we can get the pads on. But there's been some glimpses. There's been some things that we need to be aware of just in terms of, can he step up from being a wide receiver 6 to jumping 1 or 2 slots up the depth chart? If he can lock down a starting slot receiver position, I will be wholesalely surprised. But it would scream great things about where he's at in his development arc and being able to work with Aaron Rodgers. Maybe not so much good news for Corley, but they're essentially guys that are in the same boat as very underdeveloped wide receivers, but functional weapons. And I think Malachi Corley just happens to have more in his tool bag than a guy like Gipson does outside of his speed. But he has been noted during OTAs to be one of Aaron Rodgers' favorite targets during his 11-on-11 sessions. And then when you think about some of the things from last year in terms of major callouts that I saw, per NFL Gen Next stats, he was 23rd out of 103 qualified receivers for anybody with a minimum of 35 targets that had a 5.7 yards after catch per reception. So he's a guy that can make some things happen, right? We know with our offense last year, we essentially slowed all the way down to a crawl. You had to either get the ball to a guy at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage, and then hopefully they can make some things happen if the name wasn't Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall. And Xavier Gipson was one of those guys that was able to do that by looking at things like him having an 11.3 yards per reception between weeks 8 to 18, which led the team during that span. So there had to be another guy to step up. Xavier Gipson did his best to do so. And I did see another interesting stat that we didn't even utilize him as much in the slot as I thought we did last year, right? I tapped out pretty early, much like most of us did. And, I went back and board times and tried to catch some all 22 film. But realistically, there wasn't anything I was looking for to be excited about because everything was run down and broken into pieces. But I do think there are some things to work with him. If he can increase his technical ability in any facet, route running, release packages, etc., I think you are talking about a completely different looking receiver that can be another solid weapon for Aaron Rodgers. But we'll have to see if he can keep this going in the training camp. So let me know what you guys think about Xavier Gipson heading into year 2, and I'll catch you guys again. Peace.